The sun had not yet fully risen when the silence began to fade. First, a distant sound, then another one, and then, like an unstoppable wave, the noise of thousands of footsteps, weapons, and voices began to fill the air. It was the beginning of something Rome would never forget. In the year 216 BC, during the Second Punic War, the fate of one of history's greatest civilizations was about to be decided in a single day. On one side, Rome. On the other hand, a man who had already done the impossible more than once. His name was Hannibal Barca, a brilliant, unpredictable, and above all, dangerous commander. He had already crossed the Alps with an entire army, facing snow, hunger, and death, something many considered impossible, and yet he arrived. Now it was there, in the heart of Roman territory, waiting. Rome knew what was at stake. After humiliating defeats, the Senate decided to act. They assembled one of the largest armies ever seen up to that time, approximately 80,000 soldiers. An overwhelming force, men from different regions, united by a single objective: to destroy the enemy. The idea was simple: move forward, press, and eliminate Hannibal once and for all. But war is not just about numbers. It's made up of decisions. And on that day, decisions would be everything. The chosen battlefield was located near the Aufidus River, in an open area, perfect for the type of direct confrontation the Romans preferred. They relied on their brute strength, in the discipline of their legions, based on the experience accumulated over decades of achievements. The idea was that more men meant victory, but Hannibal saw it differently. For him, it wasn't a disadvantage, it was an opportunity. While the Romans prepared to advance with almost arrogant confidence, certain that they would win by sheer numbers, Hannibal studied every detail: the wind that stirred up dust from the field, the dry ground beneath his feet, the enemy army's rigid positioning. Nothing was by chance, nothing was ignored. He knew he couldn't win by sheer force, so he decided to win through intelligence. His plan was not just to defeat Rome, it was time to break. It destroyed their confidence, to show that, even with all her strength, she could bleed and fall. And as the sun finally rose on the horizon, illuminating thousands of soldiers ready to fight, the two armies began to move. On one side, a confident war machine. On the other hand, a mind that thought several steps ahead. The clash was inevitable. And at that moment, no one could have predicted what was about to happen, because that would be more than just a battle. It would be a massacre, and by a very small margin. The end of Rome. The progress began slowly, almost calculatedly. The Roman legions marched in tight formation, shields raised, spears at the ready. It was an impressive sight. Thousands of men advancing as a single entity, confident, determined, convinced that this would be the day of victory. On the other side, Hannibal Barca's army was already in position. But there was something strange. Their front line wasn't straight. It was curved, leaning slightly forward, as if it were vulnerable. To the Romans, that seemed like a mistake, a weakness, a perfect opportunity, and that's exactly what they did. They advanced with full force. The impact was brutal, shields colliding, piercing, spears, men screaming. The center of Hannibal's army began to slowly give way, step by step, retreating, and this only increased Roman confidence. They believed they were winning, they were pushing the enemy toward defeat, but that was part of the plan. Hannibal knew exactly what he was doing. While their center retreated, their strongest troops, positioned on the flanks, remained firm, waiting, observing. Time seemed to slow down. Dust rose from the dry ground, mingling with sweat and blood. Shouts echoed from all sides. The clanging of metal against metal was constant, but behind all that chaos, there was control, there was intention, and then at the right moment, everything started to change. The Carthaginian forces on the flanks began to advance, slowly at first, Then, with full force, and without realizing it, the Romans began to be surrounded. The compact formation, which used to be their biggest advantage, it turned into a deadly trap. They were cramped. No room to maneuver, no room to breathe, no space to survive. And then came the final blow. Hannibal's cavalry, after defeating the Roman knights, returned to the battlefield, but not from the front, through the back. Now, the Romans were completely surrounded. Everywhere there was no way out. Chaos began to take over everything. Orders were no longer heeded. Formations were breaking apart. Soldiers fought without knowing where to go. It was a massacre. Men were being crushed, not just by weapons, but by the desperate crowd itself. No space, no air, no hope. And the more they tried to fight, more prisoners remained. What should have been a crushing victory for Rome, it was turning into an absolute nightmare, a miscalculation, a breach of trust, a fatal mistake. And in that field, under the sweltering heat and dense dust, thousands of Roman soldiers began to fall, not for lack of courage, but because they were completely trapped inside a perfect strategy, a strategy that would go down in history. And at that moment, Rome was being destroyed from the inside out. The siege was complete. There were no more front lines. There was no more Roman strategy, just survival. Within that circle of death, the Roman soldiers began to perceive the truth. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to stay alive. Space was disappearing with each passing second. Bodies were falling, and there was nowhere for them to fall. The living were pressed against the dead. Shields were becoming useless. The swords could barely be lifted. It was a battle without movement, out of breath, hopeless. The cries have changed. They were no longer orders. They were cries for help, pure despair. Meanwhile, outside the siege, Hannibal Barca watched, calm, necessary. Everything was happening exactly as he had planned. His strategy had turned Rome's largest army into a prison, and now it was only a matter of time. Hours passed slowly. The sun rose relentlessly. The heat was increasing. The smell of blood and dust made the air almost unbreathable. And inside that hell, Rome was beginning to fall apart. Experienced soldiers, war veterans, men trained to resist, they were being crushed, not just physically, but mentally. Some were trying to escape, but there was nowhere to go. Others continued fighting, even without space, even without strength, and there were those who simply stopped, accepting the inevitable. Roman discipline, famous throughout the world, was crumbling in the face of something they had never encountered before, an invisible enemy, an impossible strategy to counter at that. Time. The net was closing in more and more, like a trap that slowly closes, no rush, flawless. And then, one of the most brutal moments of that battle occurred. With no room to fight, many soldiers died of suffocation, crushed by their own upbringing, by the very strategy that was supposed to protect them. It was total collapse, despair, spread like wildfire. Shouts echoed without response, empty. Stares replaced courage. It is estimated that tens of thousands of Romans died on that single day, an unthinkable number. Devastating loss, a wound that Rome would never forget. And yet, the most striking thing wasn't the defeat. That was what would come next. Because faced with a disaster of that magnitude, any other civilization would have collapsed. He would have backed down. I would have given up. But Rome was no ordinary civilization. As the battlefield fell silent, broken only by the final sounds of death, something was beginning to emerge, not in the field, but in the mind of Rome, a decision, a choice, and she would change the course of history, because that battle should have destroyed Rome. He should have ended his story there, but it didn't. Destroy it, and what came next? That would be even more surprising. The battlefield had fallen silent. What was once screams, steel, and chaos was now just death. Bodies covered the ground, abandoned weapons, broken shields. The air was still heavy, laden with blood and dust. The victory belonged to Hannibal. Barca, an absolute victory, one of the largest ever seen in the history of warfare. Rome had been crushed. Tens of thousands of soldiers killed in a single day. Fallen, generals, an entire army destroyed. Everything pointed to the end. For any other civilization, that would have been enough. Collapse would be inevitable. But Rome did not fall, and that's what makes this story different from all the others. After the defeat, panic gripped the city. Families were crying, messengers brought increasingly worse news. Fear spread through the streets. The idea that the enemy could arrive at any moment was real, and yet Rome has made a decision. Instead of negotiating, instead of surrendering, she chose to continue. The Senate rejected any agreement with Hannibal Barca. They knew they were weakened. They knew they had lost almost everything, but they also knew something more important. Rome could not show weakness. New armies began to be formed, even after absurd losses. Young people and the elderly were called upon. It was a fight for survival, but also for identity. Rome was not just an army, it was an idea, and ideas don't die easily. Meanwhile, Hannibal was watching. He had won, he had done the impossible. The largest army of Rome was destroyed, but there was a problem. Rome still existed. He hoped that defeat would force surrender, that Roman allies should abandon the city, that the system would collapse. But that didn't happen. Rome resisted, it reorganized itself, and he began to learn from his mistakes. Avoid direct confrontations, attack with strategy to save time. The war continued for years, and little by little, the scenario began to change. What seemed like a definitive victory was not the end. It was just one chapter. Years later, Rome not only survived, how he won the war, defeating Carthage, and forever changing the balance of power in the ancient world. That battle should have destroyed Rome. He should have ended his story. But he did the opposite. It strengthened its resistance. He changed his fighting style, and he proved something that would resonate for centuries. Rome could be defeated, but it couldn't be broken, and perhaps that was the biggest mistake of his enemies, underestimating something that refused to fall.